right, let's get going. Welcome, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Kite. I'm the clinical professor in family business at Loyola University Chicago, and I am joined by my good friends, Claudia Astrakhan and Mike Hamra. And Mike Hamra is a good friend, even though he is not a researcher. But Claudia is a professor at the University of Lucerne and a colleague that I'm collaborating with we've collaborated on a number of things, and currently we're going to be talking about the COVID research survey that we put together, which I believe is the largest study of family businesses and how they reacted to the crisis, which we'll talk a little bit about the specifics. Also with us today is Mike Hamra, who's the CEO of Hamra Enterprises, and we're going to hear a real life story of how one family has responded to the crisis. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of stuff that Mike did that's emblematic of what comes out of the research. And we'll have Mike reflecting a little bit on the research because we always like to have research in context. We don't like having research that is esoteric and not useful. So one of our really important values is making sure that any research that we're involved with is focused and applicable for family businesses. So as I said, when COVID hit in March, we were really thinking, well, I mean, I had the hypothesis that families were going to probably do a better job at responding to this crisis, just given what I know about family businesses over 25 years of working with family businesses, but really thought this is an interesting opportunity to gather data on how families respond to crises. And so I reached out to Claudia and we put together a research team to really try to gather data from across the world to understand how families were responding to COVID and what they were doing. And what is resulted is a partnership between all of the universities and organizations that you see along the bottom of the screen here that gathered data from family businesses. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Claudia, who will share with us a little bit about the methodology and what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 months about family businesses and their response to COVID.
Thanks, Andrew. Very happy to share the results of our global survey. And as Andrew said, this is a truly international endeavor. We had 9 researchers from 8 institutions on 4 continents working on this project, which allowed us, as I'll show in a minute, to really collect data from all over the world, and then also to, which will allow us going forward making detecting differences between different cultures, different geographical zones, hopefully. So if you can click, Andrew. Just briefly on the parameters of the survey. Our main goal was to identify crisis management measures that family businesses around the world use to deal with this current pandemic. And given that the different countries were affected at different times, and as we can now see very clearly to different degrees, we felt very strongly that there was a tremendous opportunity for learning from each other's mistakes, but also each other's successes. So we had a large chunk of data collection happen in Germany and Switzerland, where my school is based. And then we had somebody from Italy, we had somebody from Australia who did Australia, Asia, we had Latin America, and then the United States, which Andrew coordinated. So we were really able to get data from everywhere. So our first goal was to identify what we call common practices, and I'll just deviate here for a second because and Andrew and I talk about this a lot. We find this important. You are all familiar with this idea, this concept of best practice, right? And that's usually defined as a procedure that is generally accepted as being the most effective. Now, the problem with best practice is that said best practice is usually devoid of context. So in our context, the family business context, let's take, for example, an employment policy. So who can work and who cannot work in the business, under which circumstances, or shareholder agreement, under which circumstances can we buy, sell, transfer shares. What we see is that what works for one family might not work well for another, or even worse, it might actually be harmful, more harmful than beneficial. So what we see is that families with high levels of cohesion and trust generally benefit from such inclusive policies and practices because they're well capable of communicating effectively and resolving conflict. Now, if a policy that works well for a cohesive family is adopted by a family that lacks trust and cohesion, it will exacerbate existing or cause new conflict because the family system is not equipped to deal with the communication and conflict management demands of such a policy. So this is just an important point that I like to make. When we keep talking about this best practice, when what we are observing really is common practice. Just because somebody does something doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And what's also important, we are very fast at declaring that this is best practice, but we cannot determine that until after the fact. So we need time to see if a measure put in place actually is effective in the long run. So what we attempted with the survey was identifying common practice around the world. What is it that business owning families actually do to deal with this crisis? And then based on these common practices, by means of additional interviews and more data collection, deduct those practices that were deemed to be effective ex post. So sample. That was the end of that little excursus. So these two goals for the survey: common practices, identify them, and then deduct effective practices, which will require a little more data collection. Sample truly global, and yeah, I think it's probably the largest survey. There may be others coming, but at this point, I think this is the largest global data collection effort on
Until
COVID.
somebody refutes our data, we have the largest sample size.
Yes. Yes. So if you can click. So here are just some selected findings that I thought people might find interesting. Our respondents on average expect this crisis to last about 13 months. Now this is May and June. And there were no significant differences between countries at that point, which is interesting. It'll be interesting also to see if, on the one hand, the time horizon changes as we collect more data going forward, and if there's going to be a difference between the continents as mitigation strategies differ between continents, but also the level to which the continents are affected by this. With regards to having a crisis plan in place for the business, between 0 being we have nothing in place to 100, we got a perfect crisis plan in the top drawer. We had the average value was 46%. So most companies had something, but the mid-range value indicates that they did not feel too confident about their crisis preparedness. On the family side, it was slightly lower, but honestly still a little higher than the research team expected. So what we need to understand is what they think they answered here. Did they think that we were talking about, do they have a succession plan in place? Or did they have, did they answer this with a broader understanding of crisis preparedness on the family level in mind? So conflict mitigation mechanisms, or how to deal with reputational damage or other crises that can happen in the family realm. And lastly, we asked our respondents how resilient they thought their business was overall. Now, this is obviously self-assessed. What stood out was that the supply chain scored significantly lower than any of the other dimensions, such as financial resilience, financial stability, or human capital. Andrew, not sure if you lost the presentation or I can't see it. Mike, can you see the presentation? Andrew, can you put the presentation? I mean, my memory's pretty good, but it's not. I don't recall exactly what was on those slides. Andrew?
He may have dropped off.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
Let's see.
Well, we'll just keep going with what
Yeah.
I think I have in mind. Um, so these were, so we have quantitative data. Oh, there you are. We have quantitative data and qualitative data. So that's just a little snapshot of the quantitative data. And now on the next slide of my presentation, which will appear in a minute, there you go. We will see an analysis of the qualitative data, which I find a little more interesting because there's more room to interpret what we see here. So if you can go on to the next slide, Andrew. So these are what we think might be effective practices that are particularly relevant for the current crisis, but it can be applied to any crisis. So we differentiate between practices on the business and those on the family side. I'll just quickly walk you through these, and there's a report if you're interested. We can make this available where you'll find more details on the different dimensions. So I'll just briefly touch on that first point on the business side. These are very obvious to all of you, I'm sure, crisis mitigation measures that you're, especially now in this current time, you're intimately familiar with. I just want to raise one point because it kept coming up. The importance of seeking information constantly and from a wide variety of sources. So in this context, from government, healthcare experts, but also from other businesses that are in similar situations. So never stopping seeking information and putting in places processes that allow us to effectively analyze this information and interpret it for our purpose. So that was tremendously important in this pandemic, as you know, there was more situation coming in. We didn't really understand the virus in the beginning. We still don't, but we know more. So just keep the information coming. That was very important. The second point, also particularly important in this crisis, is taking care of employees' mental health and well-being. And that, I think, is maybe just as important as the first one, because this is a very unique situation where many employees' workplaces shifted to their homes, and many had to juggle child caring responsibilities while dealing with a full-time workload, or caring for a sick family member, or even losing someone, all the while meeting their workplace objectives, right? So this caused a lot of stress and also many boundary violations, which means having to deal with the work domain entering your private domain, and that causes a lot of stress for many. So many of our respondents reported putting in place hotlines where employees were able to talk to mental health experts, or others regularly survey their employees to make sure that the employees' mental health needs are being met. Others pay for activities that have been proven to improve employee well-being, such as gym memberships, yoga classes, which is mainly online these days. Another aspect of this is meeting employees' needs in terms of making their remote workplace efficient. And we found that particularly German companies were very good here. So this can include paying for second monitors, a more comfortable office chair or desk, or even allowing employees to take their office furniture home for the time being. Another key aspect could be contributing towards internet costs, as employees may have to upgrade their data plans. And generally, many companies try to be as generous as possible, and this includes being flexible, understanding that working from home while little kids are running around might just look a little bit different from what we're used to, and then also making sure that communicating this willingness to be flexible to employees to make them feel heard and understood in this situation. So the third point is regards the importance of reaching out to key stakeholders, financial providers, suppliers, and such, keeping them posted about measures taken and the general outlook of the business. also includes networking. So many companies reported engaging in new relationships within or even outside their industries with other businesses, sharing infrastructure, sharing suppliers, even going as far as entering new collaborations to meet market needs with people that they previously hadn't worked with. And this highlights the importance of business associations in this context, which can really bring businesses together and share these platforms where people can discuss in an intimate setting. The last point I think is very important, and it's important for both the business and the family. We find that there's two types of businesses or families adhering to either one of these two underlying beliefs. One is going back to the old normal as an option, and the second one is that it isn't. And this affects the way in which companies and families approach this crisis. Old normal companies try to surpass this crisis. For example, they'll try to get their employees back to the workplace as quickly as possible. Any crisis mitigation measure is deemed temporarily, and they're regularly revised, right? Oh, we're going to go back in September. Oh, no, now it's October. Oh, no, now it's November. New normal companies, on the other hand, have already let go of that idea that returning to before is even an option. Looking at the changes they have made over the past few months, they're making those measures they deem the most effective permanent already now. So surveying their employees to find out what they desire in terms of working remotely or on location, analyzing their current supply chains, running scenarios to identify the most effective sourcing, building a resilient stream of supplies going forward, things like that. This approach is rooting in wanting to learn from this situation, this experience, rather than overcoming it. And this also goes for the family. Many families report feeling closer after this experience, mainly because they feel more engaged. Most families have never talked this much. People feel closer to one another because they have been in regular contact with one another over the past few months. Many have had tremendously difficult decisions and had to make very painful personal sacrifices, but they made those sacrifices collectively. And based on this experience, many families are eager to continue on this path of increased communication and exchange rather than dialing back. Again, on the family side, we see that alignment and cohesion is key to overcome a crisis. In many ways, a crisis acts like a proving ground, maybe a better example, if you have a car with a poorly tuned engine, you can drive it to work every day and it's fine. But if you take it on a racetrack and you run it around for 2 hours, you might fry the engine. Same with the business and a family. If there are tears in the fabric of the family, a crisis will only make them worse. If we lack alignment and we value our individual interests over collective goals and collective well-being, in the absence of a compelling goal that unites us, we cannot expect individual family members to make sacrifices for the greater good. So investing in alignment and cohesion has never been more important. Also, and this is the second point, because we're much better at making decisions and remain actionable under pressure if we're aligned, and even more so if we're prepared, and this crisis preparedness on the family level goes beyond having a successor in place. A key area of preparedness also relates to how well-equipped family members, and in particular the next generation, are to effectively perform their various roles in the family and the business. So making this a strategic family priority and dedicating adequate funding to make sure your family members are competent, responsible owners is a key characteristic of successful multi-generational families, and this has been shown in research time and time again. So if you can click, I'm just gonna close with a statement from one of our German respondents, and I found that rather powerful. Open, transparent, direct communication and providing information in a timely manner about what's going on, what measures were taken, and what we're hoping to achieve, and in which time frame is key. Uncertainty is toxic. It paralyzes the family and drives it apart. And especially that second phrase, I think, is key here. It alludes again to the importance of communication and keeping the family and other stakeholders engaged through conversations. In crisis situations, more than ever, you cannot communicate too much, but you can very well communicate too little. So listening to your key stakeholders with an intent to understand rather than reply makes people feel heard and makes them feel emotionally connected, and it helps tremendously in securing the family members' commitment in times where they're expected to make painful personal sacrifices. I think that's it from my part. Did I go too long? Did we lose Andrew? Andrew, did you even hear my presentation? Where is he? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. Well, it wouldn't be a Zoom call if we didn't hear you're on mute at least once, right?
Check.
So we have the chat box for questions. So please put your questions into the chat box and we'll try to capture them. But now to come on and a little bit with Mike Hammer, who's got the Hammer Enterprises has over 100 restaurants across the country in 3 different franchise systems. So obviously an area that was hit really hard in the midst of this crisis, and really want to hear a little bit about his initial reflection on the data that Claudia just shared with us, and how does it connect with or diverge from kind of your experience, how you and your family dealt with COVID at the beginning here.
Great. So thanks, Andrew. So just to give you a quick background, Andrew gave you some context of our business. We own and operate 172 restaurants in 7 states. So the impact to us varied depending on what part of the country we were in. We have a pretty strong base in the New England part of the country, so Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and then in the Midwest from Chicago going all the way down to Mississippi. So it includes Missouri, Kansas, Illinois, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. And we also have some operations in Texas. So we have the majority of our business is really centered in the Midwest, central part of the country there. But the impact was different for us, just depending on where, what market you were talking about. The big issue for us, because we rely on people to come to our restaurants. We also were already doing delivery, but not at the level we're doing today. But we rely on people to come to our business. And so the statistic that impacted us that week of March 13th, and that's the week we look at it, is that Friday is when we kind of marked the date things started to fall apart and people stopped driving out and going out in their cars, was the mobility statistic. So mobility in different parts of the country, especially where we were doing business, was around 110%. So it was actually exceeding the typical levels that week of March 13th when things started to come apart, and dropped for us in most of our markets right around the low double digits. So right around 10%, 11%, 9%. And that was really the people that were still going out were what we would consider essential workers. So hospital workers, public safety. We were still relying on those folks to come to our business and get food. Our business impact from a sales standpoint reached 80%. So we were impacted negatively by 80% in sales. So we lost or had a decline of about 80% in sales. And it varied. It ranged anywhere from a low of a 45% impact to all the way up to an 80% impact. So the declaration we made at the beginning of this was keep every business open, keep every restaurant open, and keep as many employees employed as we could and can do. Some of my other colleagues, yeah.
Did you have a crisis plan beforehand, and how did that impact
So
how
interesting.
you.
Yep. Can you hear me, Andrew?
Mhm.
So we didn't have a crisis plan that addressed this specific situation. We had a crisis plan that addressed a lot of other scenarios. We put a crisis plan together within a month of this hitting us. And we went out and hired a group to do it for us and help us do it because we realized the impact of it. But kind of getting back to what started to unfold was our declaration was to keep every location open and keep people employed. We employ around 7,000, a little over 7,000 people. About 2,000 people went on leave of absence status because we had to reduce the numbers in the stores. And the goal for us was how do you generate cash for your business when your sales have that kind of an impact? And for us, it became just being able to pay for the food that we were going to sell and paying the people that were employed to work in those restaurants. And that's all we could afford. That was it. Some of the things that we ended up doing at the beginning was we looked at, obviously, payroll. Payroll was it's a big major component of our business. We decided that we would reduce the payroll for anybody out of the store. So any mid-level management members to senior executives, including myself, we just said, we're gonna slash your payroll or completely eliminate it until such time as we think we can afford to kick your salary back up to where it was. And we kept intact the salaries at 100% of all the people working in the stores. We felt that was really critical and important. Those were the essential workers in our business because they were there still serving people and taking care of the other essential workers that were still mobile and out working. After that, we started taking other measures in our business, which were some things we had been talking about doing for a long time. And we quickly made decisions to make it happen. And that included things around overhead, to how we organized our operations, from taking care of our facilities in the stores to how we actually put money back out into the business. And so we reduced our expenses as quickly as we could, not just anything outside of payroll. We just went to work on reducing it. And then the other large thing we did, or the big thing we did, is we went to our landlords and sought either full abatements of rent, which we wouldn't be required to repay down the road, or deferrals. So just having our landlords eliminate rent for a period of time, and that ended up being around 3 months. And then we would eventually put a plan in place to repay those landlords. And that seemed to work so far. And, knock on wood, we only shut down a total of 4 locations out of the 172 during the pandemic. Of course, when we came back online and state mandates were being relaxed, we did not open up dining rooms right away. It became more profitable for us to keep our dining rooms closed because it's an expense to open up a dining room, to maintain a dining room, keep your bathrooms clean, keep your dining rooms clean. So we ended up keeping those dining rooms closed, but we've now reopened all of our dining rooms in all the locations that we're doing business. And then, one of the things I think that was really good for our business that came out of all of this is the perspective and the actions that our employees were taking. The actions they're taking today around the business is much more thoughtful around how expenses are used in the business and how they deploy staff. So, for example, our employees on an average are producing more, what we call per man hour, in dollars per location. So we're doing more business and more efficient with less people. And it really came down to how our operators started looking at the business to be more efficient and more effective at producing cash to help the business. The other big thing we did is we had always been somewhat transparent with our senior management teams. We got even more transparent. We literally opened up questions and answers about anything people wanted to know about the business, about the debt that we carry for the business, to how we pay off that debt and how we take care of those loans, to how we finance parts of the business. They know so much more about the business today than they did pre-COVID. And that seemed to make a huge difference in the actions that they took when managing their own roles in business. I think the last thing that happened for us was working with all our vendors and partners. Luckily, most of the vendors and our partners that we work with in supporting our business got aligned with our proposals. Some did not, and those were the ones that took a lot of time to work through because they just resisted the fact that we were going through this pandemic. But for the most part, we had really good partners and bankers, obviously, during this period of time that really helped us get through this. And then the last thing I'll mention, to Claudia's point around family cohesiveness and alignment, we have family members that are shareholders in the business, and I received more questions from family members that are shareholders in our business than I'd ever received before. Usually most family members wait till we have a meeting. I was getting calls or emails asking about the business, asking about specific locations, just really curious about what we were doing and how we were dealing with this pandemic during this time. And I thought that was really interesting. And to Claudia's point in her research, our family today is closer than it's ever been. Not only did we talk about the business, but we helped each other out with our own personal lives. And that really helped. And there was even a point where my entire family flew into a particular area, which was Missouri, to get together during this pandemic. And I thought that was really kind of cool as well. So that's what I'd like to share, Andrew, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions.
So I'm curious about, how did you organize communication with the family in the midst of this pandemic about the business?
Sorry, ask that question one more time. You were cutting out on me.
I was asking, how did you organize communication with the family about what was happening in the business over time?
Yeah, so we increased our transparency and our communication with our own employees. We were having weekly calls with managers in the store locations in groups. Before we had those calls, we were informing our family members if we were making major decisions. For example, when we reduced the salaries of our senior teams, we informed our family that we were doing that. And we just, the communication was very different. It was about, we're going to do this, and we're going to take this action. We really hope nobody leaves, but this is what we're doing. This is what's necessary to keep this business sustainable during this period of time. So we would send out a communication before having those internal communications with our team to let them know what we were going to do.
There was a question that came in on the chat box about, why do you think the increase in transparency made such a difference for you?
I think we'd always been very transparent about the, call it the profit and loss statement, all the way down to the restaurant level, but there's also more that happens after that restaurant level, what we call the EBITDA line. And I think it helped people get their arms around all the other liabilities that the business has, around debt payments, around just general overhead, that helped them understand that there was this bigger picture. We had shared that in some ways with our senior level team, but never a broader group. And so the difference is we took it out to a broader group of our managers and let them know about those other expenses and how it all worked. And some people got their arms around it really quickly, and some people took a little bit longer, but once they got their arms around it, it just made a huge difference in how they looked at the business, and understanding what it meant to service debt, or what covenants in our bank agreements look like and what those meant to them. And so I think it just helped people put their arms around the whole picture. And a lot of ways we use models from people's own personal like mortgages to help them understand what that looked like. Yeah.
So that really speaks to something that Claudia referred to in the presentation, which is that families really place an importance on employee well-being and health and well-being. Can you talk about how you looked at that, and when you kind of move beyond just salary, how did you think about employee well-being? Obviously, you've got people on the front lines in danger at some level. How did you approach that?
So we were before our own franchisors mandated, number one, masks to be used in the stores, and also taking the temperatures of employees. That's a mandate that's now inside all of our brands, which is Wendy's, Panera, and Noodles. We were requiring that. We implemented that very quickly because our number one commitment was the safety of our employees. The second commitment was the safety of the guests. And that was a tough one because employees, that was new to employees to have to wear a mask at work while they're working and on their feet all day. So that was priority number one. Priority number two was, how do we support them in their life? We have an employee assistance fund that supports people in time of need, but we had never had people coach or work with employees. So we ended up hiring a group that has what I would call really high-level social workers that work with individuals in the burdens of life. And we had a pretty good penetration of that. At first, we have about 260 people that took advantage of it. And the trend that we're on now is somewhere around 15% of our workforce will be utilizing and taking advantage of that service in the first 12 months. And we feel like we'll double that by year two. But they help with people who are in really stressful situations, and it helped people whose landlords demanded rent or they'd be evicted. They actually stepped in and helped them and made those payments. Or they helped families whose kids were at home all day and they had a tough time going to work and leaving kids at home. They helped them get daycare. And they supported that financially as well as through other ways. But we were able to bring that group in to support our employees during the crisis, knowing that people, as funds started to run out for those families, they would have those types of issues show up for them.
Wow, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Claudia, I'm going to ask you to kind of reflect on one of the questions that came in, and you already put some stuff in the group chat, but I'd like to kind of talk about it more broadly, which is beyond kind of Zoom meetings. What were interesting things that families were doing to connect in the midst of the crisis?
Yeah, I just want to say something to what Mike just said, because we had a really good example from the German webinar, who he was sharing what they were doing to, when the pandemic started hitting Germany, and that was shortly after Italy, and the situation was really bad in Italy, and everybody was scared because it was still early on, and the employees were scared to come in, but that was a manufacturing business and they couldn't do remote work. So they actually surveyed their employees to figure out what are all the things we could do to make you feel safer in the workplace. and then expanded that question, not just, you know, make you feel comfortable in this time. And they collected all the ideas from their employees, which then, you know, made the employees obviously feel heard, and they were engaged in the problem and in the solution finding process. So I thought that was a really good way to bring in the employees and let them have a voice in this. And they, you know, they came up with ideas such as, well, let's put up portable potties outside for the delivery drivers from, you know, for our suppliers, delivery drivers. So when they come in and they drop off, they don't come into the building. So those were all, you know, just little ideas left and right that the employees thought would improve the process of, you know, reducing the risk of being exposed. So I thought that was a neat way to go about that. For the communication, honestly, for what we've seen in well, all right. So I think here we have to differentiate between the different countries that we surveyed, right? So Switzerland, Switzerland and Germany, where you know, a lot of the companies that I deal with are there. The numbers are very different. So after the initial lockdown, they've been able to go out more and see each other. So many families are back to seeing each other, with the senior generation joining virtually because they don't want to be exposed, and the younger generations meeting in person. So they found hybrid ways of getting together, but still heavily relying on technology. I think in the US, where families are generally also more spread out, a lot of things are still happening mainly virtually, also because the numbers are not as good right now as they are in Europe. But I would say Zoom has been a miracle for a miracle solution for many families. Also, as I wrote, WhatsApp. I think a lot of families are now discovering WhatsApp as just an easy, and there's other, you know, all these little softwares or these little apps out there, Marco Polo or whatnot, just to make communication easy, fun, and quick. The more we can connect, the better. The more we can share, the better. And if we require different communication channels to do that, as long as it's not overwhelming, because it can get stressful. Like some families were saying, you know, we're done with Zoom calls. We don't want to do Zoom calls, and don't send me another invitation to yet another WhatsApp group. So I think it's important to find a balance. What are people comfortable with? What do they not feel overwhelmed with? But I think at this point, it's still mainly virtual, and maybe, you know, going back to that old normal, new normal, thinking about how can families utilize these technologies going forward to find a hybrid form that allows them to talk more, because they're not required. They now have gotten to a point where they realize, oh, wait, we can make decisions together, even if we're not in the same room. So taking that realization and, you know, going forward, well, then what can we do virtually so we can see each other more often, and we can be a productive decision-making team without, you know, having the requirement of flying somewhere or potentially exposing each other.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I've seen with a couple of families is that they're less emotionally triggered communicating on Zoom. So some families that when they're in the room together get highly emotional and highly triggered and end up in conflicts. When they've been having similar conversations via Zoom, they're not triggered in the same way because they're not sitting in the same room. So, you know, that is also, you know, maybe a little bit of a bright spot for some families.
Absolutely.
Also, the imperative of the crisis gets people focused around a broader sense of meaning and purpose, and hopefully we're focusing on the good of the collective, and we're less focused on our individual interests or needs at the time, and we're finding collective solutions. So Mike, one of the things that came in on the question and answer box was, how do you fund your the assistance program that you were talking about with your employees? I mean, you've got the employee assistance program, and then you've got this kind of social worker piece where you're giving them support. How does that get funded?
So we have a so yeah, I saw that from Sarah. So thanks for the question. So the initially when we set it up, we did it pre-COVID, really without any expectation that we were going to go through a pandemic. And we did it in 2 markets, specifically in Chicago and Memphis. It was funded through our nonprofit, which is our employee assistance fund. I'm not on that board, although I worked with the board, but the board agreed to support the funding of it because how they looked at it is that if we brought in a group to support our employees, that would probably offset some of the funding going out of the Hero Fund. So they saw it as an opportunity to really increase or expand the type of support people were getting. And when the pandemic hit, we wanted to expand it into the rest of our markets. So what we did is we asked the organization that we were working with if there were other ways that they could get funding, because the nonprofit didn't have the funds. They went out and obtained grants. One of them came from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because it was targeting a specific demographic that they support. That's part of their own commitment. And so the fund, we didn't receive a full $1 million, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation contributed $1 million, and we were able to take advantage of part of that funding to help us expand it into the other markets. So essentially, part of it was done through our nonprofit, and then the remainder of it to expand into the other markets was done through grants like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Mm-hmm. So another topic that came out of the research was what Claudia was talking about is kind of the looking forward piece. And the data in May and June kind of was focusing on people thinking that this is going to be about a 13-month scenario. Mike, so how are you looking at things moving forward? Are you in the new normal crowd, or are you in the kind of going back crowd as you look at the future?
Well, I think from a business perspective, we're excited to be in the new normal. We did a lot of things that will stick in the business that we will never revert back to pre-COVID. So we're excited about that. As far as operating the business and what our sales will look like, I think we're absolutely going to be impacted over the next 12 to 14 months. That's kind of the time frame we've been looking at. We've done tons and tons of projections and forecasting to see as our sales build up and the different what we call off-premise channels expand, like delivery and catering. What would sales look like? I think a lot of our stores rely on office population, or what we call daytime population, in downtown urban locations or inside big beltways like 128 in Massachusetts. I don't think we'll see those populations come back in 14 months. I think that's 2, maybe 3 years away. I think, as all of us have done, we've reduced the need and the dependency on office space and allowing, as Claudia spoke to, we're allowing people to work from home. We're doing that as well. We've been closed an office in Chicago during the pandemic. So I think the new normal for us will be lower revenues coming in, but also new ways of making sure cash gets to the bank account still. And I think we're in a good position as long as we don't go through another major dip like we did at the beginning of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Claudia, kind of same question to you. How are you, when you look at the data, how are you thinking about the length of the pandemic and how families are thinking about the future?
Well, one thing about the length of the pandemic, and we discussed that in the German webinar, is handling the outlook of dividend payments. How long can you go as a family without paying out? And once you have and now a lot of people in Germany are saying it looks like well, I mean, they've been saying that for the last 2 years, there's going to be a recession coming, right? So now, well, 2021, not looking so bright. So not going to be a payout this year, not going to be a payout next year. How long are we going to go without a payout? And what's that going to do to individual family members who rely on these payments? And what can we do? How far are we willing to go as a family to support these family members for the sake of family peace or family cohesion? So those are very important conversations to be had. And for many families that are now caught in these conversations, also conversations that are totally overdue because they haven't spent enough time on, really figuring out what is our payout scheme going to look in the long run going forward as our family grows, and we may have to adjust our expectations as a family, right? So this just exacerbates something that was already there, and now in this situation the conversation needs to be had, because there's no way around it. And you can't pay out, I mean, you can, but it may not be ideal to pay out family members if you're cutting everybody's salaries. So that, with regard to time horizon, is a very pressing discussion for many. I think the time horizon geographically, there were no differences, which was interesting. But again, we pulled this data in May, June. Maybe people were more or less optimistic about the time horizon now. So we're going to have to pull more data to see how the time horizon, the perception of the crisis duration holds up or changes. I think regardless of how long this crisis lasts, I mean, I'm obviously also in Mike's camp and the new normal camp. I think if we can leverage what we've learned, and we can accept the new situation as it is, and try to make good use of new processes that even in the face of, and that's another aspect of that, the courageous changes. A lot of families have had to make drastic changes to their business models. And that can be very painful, but it can also be very liberating. So yeah, I can't give you an outlook. I don't know. But I think everyone's well advised to make those things permanent that have proven to be effective, and not try to cycle back to the old ways, because we might just have to, if we're circling between, staying out of the office, going back into the office, and that's a lot of adjustments, and that eat up a lot of resources.
So, quick question that came in on the chat, which is there a plan to redo the global survey? But I would kind of reframe to, what's the plan moving forward to use this data and build on this data to increase our sense of learning?
Yeah, I'm not going to do the global survey again. That was a lot of work. But what we're going to do, and anybody who's interested can reach out to either Andrew or me, is we're going to do a global panel, and we've already had over 300 people sign up for it. We're going to start pulling data in October. It's going to be a super quick survey, maybe every 4 to 6 weeks, just 5 questions or so. And hopefully be able, from all this, the respondents of this longitudinal study, then to create some kind of best practice or effective practice exchange group, where people can share in a more intimate setting what they are doing for both the business and the family. So not a global survey, but a global panel where you commit to replying to 5 questions every 6 or so weeks. So we're always looking for more participants. So if you're interested, please reach out. And then we're doing more reports. We have 1 report out, which you can find on the IFERA website, Crossing the Crisis. I'm sure we can share that link if anybody's interested. one report is out. That's a qualitative report. We're doing a quantitative report right now where we're doing more industry. And then was Timothy's question. Yes. What was, are there any industry differences? Yes, there are. More than country differences, obviously, because some industries were hardly affected while others. So we had a case in Australia when we did a webinar there of somebody running a travel agency. So that was definitely an industry that was very, very much affected, just like Mike's. So doing more analysis, making these reports available, and then doing the panel. Just as you said in the beginning, Andrew, not doing research just for the purpose of research, but coming up with findings that are applicable and understandable and then accessible to the practitioner community.
Great. Well, I'll end with a question to Mike, which is, so what are the biggest takeaways, the biggest learnings you've had throughout this crisis and that you're taking forward and you have for the folks on the line with us?
The new normal for us is going to be to get into action faster. Like I said, when we made changes to shift the way that the business operated, some of those things we had been talking about for not just months, but years. We'd been kicking those around, those ideas for years, and never made those changes before. Once we made the changes, it was essentially like ripping the Band-Aid off because it was necessary, right, for the business to survive and sustain itself during this crisis. So the biggest takeaway for me is get stuff done. Like, just do it. If there's haggling over it or whatever, I think the big takeaway for us is we've now, when somebody comes up with an idea, we literally are putting a date on the calendar to say we will have a decision made on this by X date. We've now tasked somebody internally with managing our accountabilities around that because we realize we dragged our feet on lots of things that could have had a direct and beneficial impact to the business many years ago. So I think that for us is the biggest takeaway. And I think secondly, taking care of employees really does matter. The feedback we've gotten from our employees during this time around ensuring their safety and being committed to that and then trying to support them in other ways really does matter. And we've had a lot of people who have said, I don't want to leave here. This place, you guys just went through a major pandemic and you stuck it out and I'm still here, and that's awesome. So, and I'm here and I'm safe and I feel good about that. So I think making sure people are really know that and know that you care about them makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you, Joe, Claudia, and Mike. Joe is Claudia.
I didn't call me Joe.
Yeah. So it's been many Zoom calls together with.
Good.
But thank you guys all for participating, and to Mike and Claudia for being here. We will send you the link to the report, and you can feel free to contact Claudia and I in our follow-up. You'll have our emails if there's any follow-up questions that you wanted to chat about. Just shout out to Mike here on the Q&A, the acknowledgement for the enormous sacrifice you've made for your team and management and to keep my employees whole. So I thought that was one of my inspirations for inviting Mike to this conversation. Was I was so impressed with what they were doing for the people. So
thank you.
Thanks everybody, and thanks for bearing with me through my technical challenges. We will look forward to connecting with all of you in the future and sharing with you the continuing updates that come from the work we're doing.
Great.
So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Look, they're dropping like flies.
Appreciate all these webinars.
Bernard's our biggest webinar attender. I think
Oh, really?
every webinar that I've been
I
on,
saw
he's-
Bernard. Hey, Bernard, I like your background. It's cool.
So,
All right.
Dude, you need a new server.
tell me about it. I had somebody in last week to look at things, and so I ran it off my iPhone the last half of the.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to do a